All right, so visitor car made it to the home shop today. It almost made it here on its own, but had to get towed the last few miles because the brakes just kind of went out. But it's not like the brakes went out catastrophically. They'd kind of been going out for a little while. It's a good opportunity to show how to change the brakes on a Dodge Charger. This is the RT model, but it's also a good time to talk about the importance of what your brakes are telling you when they're trying to talk to you. So the first thing you got to know is on the side of the pads, this little tab right here, this is called a squealer or a squeaker. And what it does is as the pad wears down further and further, eventually that contacts the rotor and it makes a squeaking sound. And so you'll hear it squeaking. So if your brakes are squeaking with a high-pitched squeak, then it's time to start thinking about getting you some more pads. All right, so the reason why we're looking at this car today is because somewhere in the past, maybe 6 months, 8 months ago, don't know, the brakes probably started screeching or squeaking or squealing from the little tab on the pad, and it was ignored. And so then it probably started making some grinding, which the pad had totally gone away, and so there wasn't any pad left, and so it was metal on metal, and that didn't seem to bother anything. So the last part, when the car finally says you're gonna listen to me, is when it hits these things that I guess you could call them the growlers. And what these are is the vents inside of the rotor for these vented rotor type. Not all rotors are like this, but this particular one is. And so if you look inside here, see if I can get the camera around there, it looks pretty normal until you get to the back side. The inside of the rotor has been totally chewed away. So fortunately, the owner decided yesterday that it's just making entirely too much noise. And I probably would have thought that a couple months ago, maybe, I don't know. So they decided to pull over and have it checked, and ended up having it towed home just for safety purposes. So what we're going to do is do a change out on this. So we definitely, for this side, we got to change the rotor and we got to change the pads, and we'll have a look at the caliper, make sure it's okay. It's probably gotten super hot, so we're going to do a flush and flush out some of the fluid that's down there near the brake, and get that cleaned up on this side, inspect everything, make sure nothing's damaged, and then we'll go from there. So we'll get set up on the other camera and see about putting some new pads and a new rotor on this, as well as on the other side there's a stud missing, so we'll show how to knock one of those out and put those back in too. Well, alrighty, we'll get set up and see if we can't get this car back on the road. Alright, so to get this job done, changing out the rotor and also replacing the pads, and then for this side we also need to remove this little stud right here because it's broken. Doesn't take a lot of tools, so down here on the floor, this is about all it's going to take. You just need a 18 millimeter to get the calipers off. There's 2 bolts back behind there. We'll see those in a minute. You need some kind of wire to hold the caliper up so it doesn't hang off of the brake line. To put the new pads in, you're going to need to compress the caliper back. So you need a C-clamp, and then we might have to use a pry tool and a hammer to get that rotor off. So one thing to remember, when we take the caliper off and we push the pads back, so we push the cylinder back in there, we're going to need to pop the hood and check and make sure that we don't push the brake fluid back up in the reservoir too far and it runs out. So we'll check that as we're pushing those calipers back in order to put the new pads on. The reason why you have to push the piston back in the caliper is because the new brake pads are new and they're thicker, so you have to push it back out of the way in order to allow room for the pads to come on. And then the boys will do the other side once they see how to do it on this side, because this is a good lesson learned for anybody that owns a car. And they'll take over and do the other side with the damaged rotor so they can have the joy of taking that rotor off. All right, so to get started, all we got to do is get the caliper off. So we just want to hit that bolt in the back, figure out a way to hit that with a hammer. Sometimes they come off pretty easy. we go. All right, so now with those loose, what we want to do is get us some wire. We're gonna just find some place on the caliper to run a wire through. Now we can tie our caliper up out of the way. What that does is keeps the weight off of the hose. All right. Yeah, so that way it doesn't damage the hose. All right, so caliper's off, so now we can get the rotor off. And a lot of times these rotors will just pop off. We got the caliper loose, and now it's time to get this broken stud out. So after all that hassle to get that little guy in there, he is successfully in there. I don't know why Dodge didn't give us a little bit of something to get that thing in there a little bit easier, but hey, it can be done, right? So now we're back to the easy stuff. So we got everything complete here. Now we just put the rotor back on, and then we're going to do the caliper. So got our new shiny rotor, and it doesn't matter the orientation on these. There's not any alignment holes. They're all the same. And so all we got to do, since we adjusted the brake, we may have to make it a little smaller so the car can ratchet it back out later, but we'll see how it fits. All we do is slide that up on there. Yep, still fit. So no issues there. Yeah, feels like it's fitting good. All right, so now we just switch over to the caliper. And what we want to do on this one, since nothing was really bad wrong with it, all we want to do is get it up here, and we're going to change the brakes out. So get the camera over here a little closer to the brake. So in order to change the pads out to the new pads, see, they're a lot thicker because they haven't been worn yet. And so what we got to do is push the caliper back. So we take this one loose so we can access the back side of the caliper. And let me just get it up here a little bit further. Tell you what, I'll take the rotor off while we're doing this so we can see a little better. Okay, so this is the point where we need to pop the hood, and we need to go check and make sure that the brake fluid is not too high, because if the brake fluid is getting up high in the reservoir, when we squeeze that back, it's going to pump it out. So let's pop the hood up and check the reservoir. All right, so way back here, underneath this little cover, is the brake reservoir. And you can see it right inside of there. And so what we want to do is just take the cap loose, and don't lose that. So set those someplace where you'll see them. And then you just want to look down in there and make sure that it's low enough that when we push the caliper up, it's not going to just push that stuff out everywhere. So just get some light in there. We can see we're really low. So we're in good shape. And so when we push it back, what it's going to do is rise up. So as you're pushing, if you're doing it by yourself, you probably want to stop and just make sure it's not getting too full. If you got somebody with you, they can sit here and watch this reservoir and just make sure it's not getting too full. If it gets a little too full, you can get like a turkey baster or a syringe or something and suck some out, and that just keeps it from making a mess in the car. All right, so let's go back to the back again, and we will push the caliper back. All right, so we're back, and we're ready to push this caliper back. So this is where the C-clamp comes in place. So what you want to do is leave the old pad on there, because you don't care about it anyway. You're going to change it out. And what we want to do is get the C-clamp and put it through where the other one has been removed and to the back. So you're touching on the back of the caliper's piston. And you're just going to squeeze down, try to center it up as much as possible, and just gently, slowly squeeze down. And you're going to push the piston back up inside of there. And what that's going to do is allow you the room to have the new brake pads, because they're thicker. And this is the point that as you're tightening this up, it's raising that level in the reservoir. And so if you were getting close to being full, you would probably want to check and make sure that it's not overflowing. For this one, I don't think we'll have a problem because it wasn't very full. So you just want to seat that all the way back until it's snug. You don't want to knuckle drag on it because it's really easy to push back if the caliper's still in good shape. Now, if it was hard to push back, then that's going to tell you that there may be something wrong with the caliper. All right, so we got the caliper back. I'm just going to get some light in there. I think the flashlight died. And so, if you can see inside of there, all we're going to do is just grab the pad and slide the pad out of its little teeth. All right, so we got that out. Note the direction of the squeaker. The squeaker was down on this one, and this was the inside pad squeaker. So all the squeakers are the same on the replacement pads. Yep, so it doesn't matter. So we're just gonna put the new pad back in whichever way it ends up going. So all we're doing is taking that and putting it down in those little grooves right there. So there's little grooves with little spring plates. And so you just want to put the caliper right down in the groove and push it all the way back to the piston. Okay? So that's the back one. So then now we get our front one, and it goes in the same way. So you want to put it in there till it hits the grooves. And it's going to sit just like that. So there's the new pads. So they're all ready to go. Now we just put a rotor back on. Pads are probably going to fall off. We'll put a rotor back on. And then we take our caliper. At this point we're going to untie it because we're holding it in our hand. So we get our caliper untied. Just make sure these guys stay in the grooves right there. And then you take it around and slip it back up on the rotor. See how they kind of fall out. So you got to make sure they stay up in the grooves. And then you just swing it back up on the rotor. And even with a new rotor and new brakes and new everything, it all should fit in there. And one thing that'll get you is a lot of times this shell part moves in and out. And so if you see I squeeze on the shell, it slides this way. And so you have to make sure that you have your shell oriented such that it doesn't run into the rotor. All you do is slide it back up under. Now you got it locked in. And all you got to do is just hit the two holes and bolt it back in. And there you go. You have successfully changed your brakes. And you can see right now the rotor's loose because when the wheel gets put up on it, it's going to tighten. So see, now it's tight up against it. So there we go. So this side wasn't that bad. We just made it down to the squeakers. So this one, it just probably started squeaking. So now we can move over to the other side, and the boys are going to do that side. And then we can have a look-see at that rotor once they pop that off. So we'll be back here in just a little bit once we set up on the other side. And we'll get the tires put back on. I'll finish tightening this up. It's just the two bolts have to be tightened down. And we'll call this side done. Time for the passenger side. So the boys are going to take care of this one and get her wrapped up. We'll be good to go. Just try to stay there so you can put the wire on.
Okay. Whew. Let's see if it comes
Be
off.
careful with your fingers.
Yeah, that thing is short.
Oh, there you go. There you go. We'll edit out all that other.
Yeah. That's what we're looking at. There it is. Right there. And this.
What does it look like?
What's it supposed to look like? As you can see, there's a clear distinction.
You tore like through the whole plate.
Yeah.
All I can say is you got your money's worth out of it. Size what was eating the road.
Here's what we got. Could you go get the other new brake pads?
Over there.
They're right there. So that is that. Just look at that. That's from heat, right? All that blue. In conclusion, when you hear some squealing or some chunking, that's when you know that it's time to get your brakes changed. And you don't ever let it get like this, because this is dangerous.